Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome to the Cleveland Tree Coalition's panel discussion on growing trees and equity. Jared, can you share the first slide deck? The Cleveland Tree Coalition is a group of over 40 public, private, and community stakeholders that have partnered with the City of Cleveland to rebuild our urban forest. The coalition is striving to create a healthy, vibrant, stable, and equitable urban forest by working collaboratively to implement the Cleveland Tree Plan. Next slide, please, Jared. The coalition is led by 10 executive committee organizations that are raising public awareness and funding to restore Cleveland's tree canopy. Next slide. Since 2015, collectively, the members of the Cleveland Tree Coalition have planted over 14,000 trees in the city of Cleveland, but we have much work to do. Next slide, please, Jared. To learn more about the work of the Cleveland Tree Coalition, we invite you to visit clevelandtrees.org. Next, please. Today, we'll hear from members of our community who are committed to growing trees with equity. This is a webinar format, but you are invited to enter questions for the panel in the chat. I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Divya Slita, Manager of Climate Resiliency and Sustainability at Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, who will introduce our panel. Divya?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this gorgeous 80-degree day as we celebrate the Spirit of Arbor Week. Before we introduce the panelists, and as we talk about trees and our relationship with nature, I want to just take a moment for us to acknowledge the land we are on today. We acknowledge those of the Shawnee, Miami, Erie, Ottawa, Potawatomi, and the Haudenosaunee or the Iroquois Confederacy, whose lands we stand on, and the thousands of Native American people who represent over 100 tribes who currently live in Northeast Ohio today. With that, just a brief overview of what we want to do in this panel today. The 2015 Cleveland Tree Canopy set a target to introduce our canopy from 19 to 30% by 2040. We've made a lot of progress in the last 5 years, but the canopy still continues to decline. It ranges anywhere from 30% to 5% across the city, and this affects our communities here disproportionately. Our BIPOC communities are disproportionately and systemically are suffering from the lack of these benefits that the trees provide. So the 2020 update really calls upon our community to rise together and collectively to grow an equitable canopy. To do this, we are challenged with peeling many layers of systemic injustices to address health and environmental concerns, to creating a just, accessible, and in the process creating just, accessible, and green opportunities. We know that interconnected problems have interconnected solutions. So today in our panel, we'll hear from our range of community leaders on the ground who'll talk about these existing barriers. So with that, let me introduce you to our panelists. Meet our panelist, Samira Malone. Samira Malone is the Neighborhood Planning Project Coordinator for Midtown Cleveland, where she manages several of the neighborhood planning and peacekeeping initiatives, which include development and management of Midtown Neighborhood Tree Plan, which is the neighborhood's comprehensive tree inventory and design intending to sustainably achieve 100% tree canopy stock over the next 10 years. Samira is Cleveland-born and raised resident and a proud graduate of Cleveland State University with her bachelor's in urban and regional planning and a master's in urban planning and development. She believes that trees are a necessary part of healthy, thriving communities, and growing and maintaining them are acts of restorative justice. Thank you for joining us, Samira. Our second panelist is Erica Burnett. Erica Robinson is the Director of Community Building and Engagement at Femico's Foundation, the Community Development Corporation for Glenville Neighborhood. Under her direction, the the CBNE staff lead community engagement activities in Glenville, Huff, and St. Clair and Superior neighborhoods. The alignment of her passion for sustainability with her career began in 2009 when she launched a youth landscaping program and gardening program in the Buckeye neighborhood. Her commitment to reducing carbon footprint has led to several community partnerships and resources that have introduced or reintroduced residents to environmental practices. Our third panelist for this session is Veronica Walton. As the co-founder and executive director of the Food Depot to Health, Veronica Walton determines and formulates policies and provides overall direction in areas that focus on environmental justice and equity, with guidelines set by the board of directors and with input from the non-governing advisory board. The primary focus is on restoring lives and lands and communities, seeking equity for populations that have been marginalized by the Industrial Revolution and the digital divide. Over the last 20 years, she's developed and presented employee training materials, provided programming for health and wellness initiatives, and provided project management on hundreds of projects in the environmental and food space. She's a graduate of the Case Western Reserve University School of Management, and a lifelong learner. She's also a neighborhood leadership development program alumni, with serving as the ambassador, Cleveland Climate Action Ambassador, and is also a certified Roots of Success entrepreneur. We round this panel off with our councilperson, with Councilman Griffin from a very diverse Ward 6, a fierce advocate for his community. Councilman Griffin joined the Cleveland City Council in 2017 after serving the city of Cleveland as the executive director for the Community Relations Department for 11 years. Councilman Griffin is the chairman of the Council's Safety Committee and vice chair of the Workforce Community Benefits. He sits on development and planning and sustainability, finance, and operation committees as well. In June of 2020, he was the primary sponsor of the city's resolution to declare racism as a public health crisis. Councilman Griffin began his community-based work with the Harvard Community Services Center, as well as a community organizer and later program manager at the East End Neighborhood House. Thank you very much for joining us today, Councilman. So thank you to all the panelists for their time, for the deep work that they do. Starting off with Samira, we'd like to hear from you about through the work that you do, how you see racial equity play into our tree canopy and how you're addressing this, and what is the lens that you are addressing your tree canopy work through. Thank you, Samira.
Thank you so much, Divya. And thank you so much for that introduction. As you mentioned, my name is Sam Malone. I'm the Neighborhood Planning Project Coordinator for Midtown Cleveland. If we can actually go into the slides, I can talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing in our neighborhood with our Midtown Neighborhood Tree Plan. So as mentioned, just to give a little bit of background, back in 2019, we received funding for the Cuyahoga County Healthy Tree Canopy Grant, in which we were able to do some priority planting as well as maintenance planning for our neighborhood. So you can go on to the next slide. The goal of this plan is actually to sustainably and grow our young tree canopy as well as preserving our existing tree canopy. And we're able to do that through these 4 actions. So the first is implementing a tree planting plan, as well as developing a maintenance plan, engaging residents and private landowners through public outreach and education programs, as well as doing an annual review of our existing plan and making sure that we're staying on track and delivering effectiveness through our tree canopy efforts. Next slide, please. So we wanted to put together kind of like 4 points that act as our guiding star, as well as our philosophy and approach to understanding the tree canopy divide. So first, it's important to understand that the disinvestment, the disproportional disinvestment of tree canopy, specifically within Black and Brown communities, directly aligned with racist redlining policies. Next slide. We found through this work that oftentimes tree canopies are regarded as an environmental good, but in actuality, they're a necessity and quite literally an indicator of the health of a community. Next slide, please. So it's extremely important to understand the data and to know the data and allow it to be a guide for the work that we do. But aside from quantifying the data, Black and Brown communities just deserve trees. Next slide, please. And we look at growing and maintaining our tree canopy as an act of restorative justice, touching back upon the fact that many of these communities have experienced a strategic disinvestment in green infrastructure by design. Next slide. So during our work, we were able to inventory over 3,600 sites, and that breakdown is tree sites, planting sites, and stump sites. Next slide. And so as we began to go down this tree canopy work and really dive into something that was new to us organizationally, we wanted to get an understanding of what would be guiding our process. So we put together a scope, and the scope is comprised of three things: looking at trees as real estate through their real estate value, looking at trees through the lens of environmental and social justice, as well as looking at racial impact indicators. Next slide, please. So first, looking at the structural value, we were actually quite surprised by the number in which our trees have a structural value. So we wanted to look at trees not only as the environmental benefits that they have, but actually look at them as green infrastructure, looking at them as environmental real estate. So the structural value of Midtown's current tree resource is about $4.5 million, and that structural value is basically based upon the cost of what it would be to replace a tree. And through this work, we also learned that it's imperative for us to diversify our it's imperative for us to diversify our tree species because, say, for example, you have some type of pest that comes in and it knocks out a particular section of your tree canopy that's extremely substantial, then you find yourself with a major issue. So in order for us to continue to preserve and grow our structural value, it's imperative for us to make sure that we are maintaining that diversity. And then we also thought that this was just a great data point to begin to have those conversations with private landowners. As we all know, we can do as much planting as we possibly can in our neighborhoods within the public right of way, but a lot of the major impact is made when we're engaging those private landowners and beginning to do some plantings on those sites. That's how we'll be able to reach that 100% tree canopy stock that we are leveraging for. So we thought that understanding the structural value would be a great leverage point when beginning to have those conversations. Next slide. So just to give you a quick overview of the functions and benefits of our current public tree resource, we wanted to have an understanding of what our current tree benefit is within our existing tree canopy. So just to give you guys a little bit of background, when we went into this work, we actually found that we didn't have as many trees in our public right-of-way that we budgeted for. We were quite surprised. We actually, within Midtown proper, only had about 1,800 trees. So fortunately enough, we were able to expand our geography a little bit, and we were actually able to engage a private landowner, which is Dunham Tavern, who's going to allow us to do some plantings in our first phase. And we were also able to expand a little bit of our geography into doing some tree maintenance inventory work into the Huff neighborhood. So what we actually found is that about 1,000 pounds of pollutants are removed from the air annually. We have about 20,000 pounds of CO2 sequestered annually, over 139,000 gallons of annual stormwater intercepted. Again, that $4.5 million structural value, and 1.6 million pounds of carbon stored. So it's just important that we were extremely shocked that our small canopy rendered such large numbers. So it just continues to drive us to push forward in the importance of making sure that we're continuing to preserve and grow our tree canopy simultaneously so we can see these numbers grow so they can continue to be an added benefit to our communities. Next slide, please. So the next slide is looking at environmental social justice and looking at the racial impact indicators. So as you guys see this map right here, this is our prioritized planting zones by census block. So when we first initially got this map, it was just broken out by census block, but we wanted to be a little bit more intentional about looking at the ways in which the areas that we see a decline, as well as looking at the disaggregation by race and ethnicity. So to no surprise, unfortunately, the census blocks 6 and 9 have the highest priority of planting. So those areas have the lowest percentage of tree canopy, but also have the highest percentage of Black residents. And as mentioned before early in the presentation, if we look at any redlining map, if you look at anything that looks at disproportionality, of course, you'll see that Black and brown communities are deeply affected by a lack of tree canopy, as well as a lack of any other resources and social things that impact social determinants of life. So we are being very intentional in making sure that we are prioritizing these planting sites first as this act of restorative justice, because again, mentioned before, many Black and brown neighborhoods have experienced environmental disinvestment intentionally and by design. So we have to make sure that if we're going to be doing this work moving forward, that we are addressing those issues first and foremost. So next slide. So going into our next step. So over the next 2 years, we're going to be planting 175 trees per year. And in our first phase, we're starting off with 40 trees at the Dunham Tavern site. And then we're going to be doing an additional 135 trees in the public right of way, but we're going to be focusing on those specific priority planting zones in Black and brown communities, in communities that we see have a significant decline or lack of tree canopy. We're also going to be developing a species plan because it's important to plant the right trees in the right places. We're also working and doing some early thought partnering on creating a community tree education stewardship program, as well as an arbor workforce program. Because as important as it is to provide community with resource and education around tree canopy, there's also quite an opportunity for folks to be able to work in this field. Next slide, please. We're also going to be developing a maintenance priority, a high-risk priority plan. So we'll probably talk a little bit more about this later on in the panel, but it's important to not only plant trees, but making sure that we're planting trees in environments that's going to be healthy enough for them to thrive. So we want to make sure that we're being conscientious about addressing our high risk and high priority areas within our tree canopy. We're also going to be engaging private landowners through public outreach to make sure that we can really make some major impacts with plantings, and then doing an annual review of our current maintenance plan to make sure that we're staying on track and aligning with our goals in regards to the structural value, the racial impact indicators, as well as environmental social justice. So it's a pleasure to be on this panel. I'm going to kick it over to whoever's next, and I look forward to all the questions.
Thank you, Sam. That was great. It's really interesting to see how you're using, I mean, it's about time we're using those redlining maps of disinvestment to put the infrastructure back in place. So with that, I'll invite Erica Burnett from Femicos to talk next about the work that they are doing in the Glenville and Huff neighborhood with respect to this.
Good morning, everyone. So just a little bit about my work in Glenville. And I've been working in this community since 2011. And it's actually one of the year that I first kicked off some greening projects in Glenville, and tree planting, of course, is really aligned with underutilized lots in the community. So we have been really addressing this issue for some time. But you know, there is a lot of challenges when doing this work and being boots on the ground. And then sometimes there's a lot of disconnect with the work as well. So it's really for us to continue to push this work forward, work with residents. You know, we, as you are on the ground doing this work, you hear a lot of the residents and what they're passionate about. Yes, they're passionate about trees, but they're passionate about saving their home as well. And, you know, so sometimes they look at trees as a hindrance, not a benefit. So it's about also changing the mindset of residents in the community so that they have an understanding the health benefits in the community, and how do we get residents really excited about trees and tree canopy and how it benefits our community. You know, a resident is like, well, if this tree is here ripping off my roof or my garage, why would I plant another tree? It's hard to convince a resident that this tree is important to, you know, for a lot of reasons. And it actually is an energy savings as well, having trees around your home. So it's a lot of added benefits for a resident, but that convincing piece of it is really sometimes difficult. So one of the things that we try to do is really start with residents, younger residents, and with our youth landscaping program. They're really involved in helping plant the trees. So they're learning at a young age, and we try to connect as many youth as possible to the work so that they grow up understanding these benefits, and they grow up understanding what the importance of maintenance, the importance to take time, how long it takes to maintain a tree, the survival of trees, and just that first 2 years of life of a tree. So we work really close with our youth to get that understanding for them. So trying to just change the community and how they view things, and with youth and connecting with the different schools in the community, that is really a key part of moving this work forward. So each year we're planting trees throughout the neighborhoods. We have so many partners that reach out to us who are, right there providing those resources to get the trees in. But one of our roles as the CDC is to really make sure that that tree sustaining life. So if we're out there watering, and this is not easy work. It's really a lot of work that goes into making sure that a tree survives. Just one tree. It's a lot of work that goes into that. So, a lot of times, sometimes we do hit barriers as the CDC, from the city. Sometimes we get barriers around getting hydrant permits. It's those things that we need in place that we all have to work together to make sure that this is intentional work that has to survive, right? This is something that we all have to make sure moves forward collectively, from the residents' perspective, from the city CDC, in the community, who is really making sure that this work happens in the neighborhood. We all have to work together. We all have to be very intentional about this work, or it's never going to work. We're going to always move 2 steps backwards when we're trying to move 4 steps forward. So it's really about the collectiveness of everyone involved to make sure that this work move forward. So that's one of our struggles, but we also understand the resident struggles. So it's also part of our work to make sure that the residents are educated about this work. And we've done a lot of tree workshops in the class, hands-on tree plantings. We've had in-classroom tree workshops. So residents, we have a lot of enthusiasts in the neighborhood, but it's not enough. We need a lot of people on board, and residents having that understanding. People, when things get taken away, like leaf removal, sometimes that's discouraging for a resident. We've had this service in place. Why is the service now gone? It comes and goes, or it just in one part of the neighborhood. So I think when the residents see that the city, the county, CDCs are all moving in one direction, they'll jump on board with us. So I think that's the one key dynamic that has to really be very visible for community members to understand. Or we're going to still be facing this down the road, and we're still going to continue to have these barriers and challenges. So that's where we are. We have a lot of projects. We are really trying to look at some of the heat islands. We have looked at the heat islands in Glenville, in particular, along 105 and St. Clair, and trying to get churches, and we have a lot of churches, and particularly on East 105, trying to get churches on board into this earth stewardship, and getting, looking at the parking lots and parking areas, and trying to connect with the sewer district and get green infrastructure grants in place to really redo those parking lots in the area to include trees and tree canopy, which is also a benefit for the parishioners that come into the community and worship every Sunday. So working with each church, and that's been a slow process, but we have reached out to them to say this is something, and we know funding is going to be a major role in this and how this shapes up. But that particular area in the Heat Island, it connects to a lot of community members along that East 105 corridor, that St. Clair corridor, and that's where we definitely have a Heat Island. And we really have to really increase the shade along that lines. So that's where we're looking at moving forward in that neighborhood. And we're working with a church, St. Casimir Church in Huff right now. There we have a tree planting project coming up this year, which I'm excited about. They have a lot of vacant land around them now that we're going to be looking at adding trees. So just for us, for Famicos Foundation. Thank you all the partners that reach out to us every year in the name of trees. We're always here and open to tree planting and making sure that we are increasing the tree canopy in Glenville, Huff, and St. Clair Superior. Thank you, Divya.
Thanks, Erica. You guys have been doing this work for a pretty long time. So with that, I'll pass it on to a resident community gardener and an advocate, Veronica Walton, to talk a little bit about the work that she's doing and how she sees trees and what she hears from the ground, what it means to do this work there in her community.
Thank you, Divya. And first, I want to say congrats to Samira for your goal of putting 175 trees in the neighborhood in the next 2 years. That's definitely challenging, but it seems very attainable goal. I hope that I could see that come to fruition. And then, of course, to my comrade on the ground, Erica, congrats for this many number of years of really having your feet on the ground and moving forward in community and education as it relates. And that's partly where Food Depot to Health comes in. I'm the executive director for Food Depot to Health, and I am excited to be here today to share with you all as a representative of the Black environmental leaders as well. I was asked to speak on behalf of community and how things sound and look from the ground up. And so with that being said, I have a background in health, and I don't think that I would do this if I didn't see the direct connection between the environment and health. And so with that being said, I talk a lot to private owners about trees, some of the concerns they have. And I think that the role that I play in community is one of alliance. I like to align myself with larger institutions and organizations and gather educational information and share that at the grassroots level in an understanding, easy to understand way and applicable way. So with that being said, a lot of times when I speak to homeowners, they speak about some of the things that Erica brought up. Their concerns about the damage from trees, their concerns about the roots going into their foundations, trees falling, and all of that kinds of things. And so, I believe that there should be people on the ground listening to those kinds of concerns and still keeping their eye on the prize. What are we trying to do here? We're trying to decrease our carbon footprint. And so with that being said, we also look at other opportunities and ways that people can participate if they don't see the beauty in trees, which I absolutely love trees. I'm a mountain girl, and I actually was born in the mountains. And so with that, I appreciate them, and I understand the health impact and all of the energy savings and all of that kinds of things that comes from having tree canopy. But if someone is not there, I feel like this is a good opportunity for us to still bring them alongside of the conversation and how you can participate in changing your environment and creating one that's healthier, that's beautiful, and easy for you to maintain with comfort. So with that, I've done some reading about the that was put out by the National Academy of Science, Engineers, and Medicine. And there are ways that people can participate that will be called like a negative emission technology. And so soil, which all of us walk on regularly, is one of those opportunities for individuals to participate in lowering or changing their carbon footprint. A diversity of plants in the soil really offers the environment the chance to capture some of that carbon. And so with Food Depot to Health, we do urban agriculture, and we have a particular class that's called a Homestead Class. And with homesteading, we really are talking about what are you doing at home? So it gives us an opportunity to speak to individuals about what does your backyard look like? And is there an opportunity for a tree there? And if they are not amenable to that, then what about if you had some rain gardens in place, or if you had backyard gardening, or things that are actually going to put them in a place of participating in this movement that is so critical at this time for us to change the scenario with the climate change, and to also offer opportunities for people to become adaptive in nature. So, you know, we love to get people to change what they do. So if we were able to move forward collectively with the larger institutions and also grab hands of those in the individual, my vision would be that we would see a lot less grass. We would see, as some of the older people would say, a lot more flowers. And we would also see, as those who are raising families and struggling and having issues with accessibility to fresh food, more food grown in their own backyards. And so with that being said, we also know that everybody doesn't have a backyard. So learning how to grow in spaces that are shared by community as well. And then, you know, I'll close with this. In the Glenville area, we've been working in that area since 2009. And we have worked in community spaces that are non-traditional. We worked with the Hitchcock Center for Women. We have worked on several occasions with the Famicos Foundation, and we also have an urban farm there. And a lot of those opportunities have given us, if you will, the right to speak to community members and bring them in on this movement. And so this year, and within the next 2 years, it's our hope and desire that working with the Famicos Foundation and working at our farm at the League Park Marketplace, that we'll develop a group of people that we call homesteaders. And so homesteaders is very, very clear in the name of it. These people are doing what they can at their home. And if that means that they're going to have container gardens, if they're going to have inside plants, which also lend to cleaning the air on the inside of their homes, and or if they're going to work in community gatherings, we're trying to get people to a place where they recognize that they can participate with just their hands. And there are documents, plenty of articles that talk about how one can plant a diversity of plants in the soil and capture carbon in the soil. So along with trees and tree canopy and rain gardens and all kinds of green infrastructure, vertical growing, and urban farming, it's our hope that we can get neighborhoods and homes individually engaged and involved. And so with that, I'll leave you with an article that I think is really a good article. It's put out, you can look it up, by the National Academy of Science and Engineer and Medicine, and it's called Negative Emissions Technology. And so one of the technologies that they talk about is land management and fixing carbon in the soil. So, you know, just staying abreast on those kinds of things. I just want to celebrate with you all on how we can move more people forward. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Veronica. If you don't mind dropping that link to that article on the chat, that would be helpful.
Awesome. Sure.
Thank you. Councilman, if you can, thank you for joining us. If you can share an overview of what you hear from the community and what are some of those barriers to that planting, that would be great for us to sort of hear from the side of the coalition.
First of all, thank you so much, Divya. It's great to be a part of this coalition and be a part of this group of so many passionate people. I have to admit that I'm actually new to the game when it comes to tree preservation and those things. Our resident scholar that used to be on that, Matt Zone, is now the head of Thriving Communities. So I want to give a shout out to him because he used to be the one that really was the resident scholar and expert on trees. But since he's left, a lot of us have been really trying to pick up where he's left off around tree preservation. So a couple of things that I'll just tell you: the city of Cleveland, the codified ordinance that governs our tree canopy is 509. It's also 341 that's in design review that really helps us look at our tree canopy, and really looking at planning really is in 503-1. So just want to make sure that people who are listening can understand that there are some codified ordinances that kind of guide our tree preservation. I will start off by saying that I think that Veronica and Erica and Sam Malone were actually right. A couple of challenges that I'll see that I'll tell you first about, and then I'll tell you some of the things we're doing in Ward 6, as well as some things that we're working with as the city. Tree roots have, in a lot of cases, especially when you look at places like the Fairfax community, where people that grew up in that community have a lot of nostalgia because they remember when it used to be tree-lined streets. But now, since those trees have gotten older, they have caused damage to houses, caused damage to sewers, haven't been maintained properly, caused sidewalks to raise. So it's always been a challenge because, other than maybe crime, housing, and safety, as a council person, tree preservation and problems with trees were one of the top 5 issues. Also, you have a lot of people who are seniors that have trees on private property, and they have a pretty hard or a pretty tough challenge pruning those trees and maintaining those trees. And oftentimes they're empty nesters now, so they don't have families that can help with those resources to help them take care of those trees, and they become nuisance and they become a problem. So we do have a program at the city of Cleveland, but I will tell you that we could use more money to really help with the tree canopy, especially for seniors that deal a lot with those things. Another problem, which is a little bit different, is I have places like Belgian Village, Fairhill Village, and others that really want trees planted along the median. If you go, for example, between Fairhill all the way up to from MLK all the way to Northmoreland, there's a median strip. And in that median strip, you have residents that have been fighting for years that want to get trees there. But finding the right kind of tree that can withstand the salt that comes up from winter and other things has been a challenge. So really trying to make sure that we find the right species that we can actually get people to plant, and quite frankly, trees that are highly resistant to salt and other factors that can affect them along the way. I will tell you that we also have another ordinance that was introduced in 2018, which is 1121-2018 or 1121-18. And that governs whenever there's a construction site that takes place, they have to have a tree plan. Well, making us make sure that the city enforces that. In Little Italy, I have a lot of challenges with that because it's really built out, and a lot of people want to see more trees and they want to see more natural barriers. And, those are some challenges that we experience with really trying to do that. One guy actually knew 1 week before we were about to introduce the ordinance and cut all of his trees before he did his construction site just to try to get in before the ordinance. So people are taking notice that the city's trying to be more stringent on trying to help our tree canopy get in place. I would tell you that a couple of things that we're trying to accomplish as a city is, I know that we have a canopy with about 19% of our city, that we're at about 17.9% of our tree canopy. We want to get up to about 30%. And I know that there's a gain of about 1,200 acres each year, but we also lose approximately 16 acres. So we're really trying to balance that out. If I look at a couple of other goals, the 30% we want to get is by 2040, and currently As I mentioned, we're at about 18, 17.9 to 18. And that means that we would have to plant about 28,500 trees per year in order to get to our goal of having a 30% tree canopy by 2040. Last but not least, in the neighborhoods that I represent, there's been a big interest in certain areas around adding trees. For example, street clubs on East 124th. We've held tree plantings there, of course, hosted by the Thriving Communities Initiative. We've also hosted tree plantings throughout the Dome Brook. I sit on that board, and throughout that area, they've been a great partner in helping us identify locations to plant trees, most likely around the Fair Hill Partners area on 124th and Cedar. We've also had the Bumper Crop Farm, which is on Woodland, even though it will probably be replaced in the near future with housing, affordable housing. We still are committed to trying to find a location to make sure that we increase or put the trees back up that we lose in that area due to construction. We've also had great partnerships with the Cleveland Clinic. In the past, we've had trees on East 97th and Cedar, and we actually have a tree planting event that as people talk about really trying to engage private employers, what better private employer that really is focused on health and equity as the Cleveland Clinic, and the largest employer in the state of Ohio, to really help us with our tree canopy. And we've done a lot of planting in the Fairfax area. Most notably, we have a tree planting event this upcoming Saturday from 9 o'clock until 12 o'clock this Saturday, May the 1st, at 108th and Cedar, where the Cleveland Clinic will be providing the trees and tools, and we'll be out there planting trees this week. So we've done a lot of things at the micro level and the macro level at the city. And I will tell you that I've gained a whole new appreciation of trees because of the challenges that we face and that some seniors face, but also because of my commitment that I've gained to recognize that many of the challenges that we deal with from a socioeconomic standpoint are due to health inequity. And when you look at trees that reduce the carbon dioxide, when you look at trees, how they help with, I like, what my friend talked about earlier when she talked about heat islands, Morris Black and, places like that, Woodhill Estates, these are heat islands. And we're looking at, as we rebuild these places, how do we make sure you put trees? But I also would tell you that it also helps with asthma. It helps with cleaning impurities. It takes solid waste and solid compounds out of the air. We know that we had a lot of factories and a lot of manufacturing companies in the city of Cleveland, especially in the East 93rd Street corridor. So we're really trying to encourage people to really change their mindset about trees and make sure that we support trees as a city. Once again, I'm pinch hitting, but I have learned a whole new appreciation about trees, and I'm honored to be here to give, but to learn just as much as I can give to this conversation. So thank you, Divya, and Council, as well as Ward 6 stands ready to work closely with the Tree Coalition to increase our canopy.
Thank you, Councilman. Really, as the Tree Coalition, this event today, we're having this as a listening session. We want to hear we heard from the panelists some of the struggles, and then we're also hearing from the active chat board on this site to sort of, with some of those very interesting questions, some targeted to some particular questions at our panelists. So I think with that, I'll go ahead and we'll reserve some time for Q&A. We should, and then if we have some more time, there's a couple more questions that we can ask you. First, Sam, there is one question for you. Whenever you're ready, it is asking for more information about risk abatement. Do you have any more information that you've gathered through the work that you've been doing? And is there something that you can share with us today? Just a quick couple minutes.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit more about our risk abatement. So basically what we have discovered, as I mentioned a little bit in the presentation, is that in order for us to make sure that we're thoughtfully and responsibly and sustainably planting these trees, we want to make sure that we're addressing the high risk pruning and removal in order to plant trees in the best environment. So we're actually in the process of putting together a high risk maintenance plan in which we're going to be addressing those before we even begin to address our tree planting. So we don't plan to do a tree planting until late fall. We're also being really, really intentional about our young tree training. As we went around and did our geography tours and worked closely with our consultant, Davy, we discovered that you can do as many tree plantings as possible, but the first 3 to 5 years of a tree's life is very, very important to make sure you're doing those prunings so it can survive the long haul. So we've just been really, really intentional about that. But that's one of the other additional barriers we kind of ran up against, is that although there's quite a lot of funding out there available for tree planting, there isn't a lot of funding and opportunity available for tree maintenance. So when it comes to us being a smaller neighborhood organization, we have to be creative in making sure that we are addressing those high risk maintenance for that, to abate any issues furthering in our tree canopy, while also responsibly doing the maintenance for trees that we're actually currently planting. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Sam. Sandra has been fielding a bunch of questions. So I'll let her point some of these questions and ask some of these questions of the panelists here. And what I ask is that you keep this in mind, that we want to hear all your struggles as well in this. So when you're framing this answer through what you're hearing, there's the city of Cleveland here, there's county, there's all these members. We're looking to sort of hear all these answers through those lenses so we can sort of best collectively come up with those solutions. So with that, Sandra, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Divya. There's a question about watering trees in Midtown, and I'm wondering if you all could speak to some of the needs and barriers that exist to maintaining trees after they've been planted, and how that looks as we start to scale up plantings across the city.
So I can start off and anybody can jump into it, but we're new to our planting, so we haven't actually put anything in the ground yet, but we are working with Davy, who has put together a whole watering maintenance plan for us. So we will be following their guidance and their suggestions in order to thoughtfully do so. But I would love to hear from any of the other folks who have been working on the ground in previous tree planting projects and hearing kind of like, what are the barriers or issues that you ran up against in regards to this, because that would be helpful.
Yeah, I can jump in. So I can speak to the watering is probably, the most difficult, and is one of the reasons why we try to target fall as a tree planting season for us, going back into the rainy season. So it limits the amount of work that goes into watering. It's really difficult summertime to plant a tree and maintain that watering schedule that tree needs, although it has happened. So if we didn't have funding and dollars for a youth program, we probably would have a bigger struggle trying to get someone to water those trees. Some of the things that we have done, if there are trees like in pocket parks near residents, some of our residents have stepped up to the plate and watered trees. Sometimes it may be a little difficult to get a hydrant permit. If it's a hydrant nearby, that's one of the challenges we face a lot when we do tree planting, is getting a hydrant permit. But once we get past that hurdle, then that commitment is there, and we're relying on a resident. And yes, we work with them to make sure that happens. But when we are doing tree planting, we're very careful about where they go. One, you're looking at if you have invested residents. Two, do you have the staff to maintain those trees or water those trees when those trees go in the ground? You have to be all in when those trees go on the ground, or you will lose those trees, no matter what the season is, because even in the fall, you can hit a dry spell. So I think that's when you're doing this work, you have to be very strategic and thoughtful, and not just like, oh, I'm gonna plant a tree just to plant a tree. That's not how this works. It has to be very thought out. And that maintenance plan has to be ready to roll the minute that tree hits the ground. And I thank you for the Western Land Conservancy for introducing us to tree diapers, because that's something I learned new this past year. So that helps preserve and helps continuous watering. We just had a project, we just introduced tree diapers to with the Cleveland Clinic this past year in the Huff neighborhood. So that's also a very, looking at those ways to also make sure that continuous watering is happening. So that is always a challenge, but also moving very strategically and planting is definitely key to this work as well. That is part of it. So.
Yeah, I would like to speak to that also, as it relates to communicating to as many people involved as possible. For instance, even in a public arena, there were some trees that were put in at a school site, and the maintenance crew didn't agree with and or commit to maintaining the trees. And so there wasn't anyone who was kind of assigned to take care of it in advance. And so once the trees were in, the gentleman just decided they would cut them down with a lawnmower. And so like over communicate, assign, reassign. That seems like that's also a very helpful way of seeing the tree through the early stages to the place where it starts to become established.
Great, thank you. We have a question about resources that have helped you decide on things like choosing the right tree for the right place. And I want to expand this question a little bit. You all are tree experts, or maybe you weren't, but you're quickly becoming tree experts. So what resources have helped you learn so much about trees in such a short period of time? And what areas are you looking to partner on?
I'll try to just, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. I was going to tell you that, really what brought it to my attention is our residents. I have a gentleman by the name of Julian Kahn, and Julian has showed a lot of interest in it. And I have to say also working closely with Thriving Communities between Jay Westbrook and Jackie Gillen, when they were working a lot to really try to create trees, pocket parks, and other things. It really helped me see the value of really trying to increase the tree canopy. So really just watching people do it on the ground and really, having residents that have become very interested in it. So I've also lived on Larchmere. That's where my personal house is at. And, a lot of the, we have one of the best businesses right on 110th in Larchmere, where a gentleman by the name of Mike Suppler has a landscaping business. So he has been very generous in donating a lot of trees and working on putting things in the neighborhood. So really, like a lot of different things, when it's driven from the community and driven from people in the neighborhood who really want to see it, it's always the best practice. And that's where I got a lot of the interest from.
Councilman, is interesting you brought up Mike Suppler because he's the person who taught me how to plant a tree in Buckeye neighborhood. So, and how much the tree needs watering. So I learned firsthand from him, and I'm grateful for him because he taught me how to open a hydrant, everything. So, and just really quick, and he taught my youth that was there how to do those things. So that was back in 2009, 2010. So those lessons stuck with me. But I just wanted to say about the funding. Funding comes from different sources. Cleveland Neighborhood Progress has been really instrumental in getting and connecting us with dollars to do vacant land reuse. Some like Cleveland Clinic has now come into the community and help with tree plantings. I think that, like Sam mentioned, like that initial dollars is there, but a lot of times the CDC is faced with that maintenance cost. And a lot of times that maintenance cost is a huge strain on budgets. And a lot of times we don't get recoup that cost. But we know we have to do it, right? So that's something that is always the missing component when we're doing this work on the ground, is those dollars for maintenance. The initial costs is usually come really quickly through private funds. A lot of community partners step up and help with tree planting. But it's really critical for the CDC to really make sure that the maintenance and the survival of those trees move forward. And even with like the pruning and things, we have paid people to come in and prune trees. Those dollars just not there over time as those trees grow. So I think that's one of the missing components for us as the Community Development Corporation, is getting those dollars in to help sustain the life of those trees.
Mhm. And if I could, I would just like to quickly add another partner that isn't often thought of is a fruit farm. There are some people who have that same thought of times past of having fruit trees in their backyards. And so, you know, meeting people where they are, they're more motivated when the fruit bears something, fruit, nuts. And so we have partnered with a fruit farm, mainly for the product itself, but just the past couple of years recently learning more about growing fruit trees and how to take care of them. And I think that that would really bring in another part of the community that is adverse at this time towards the growth of trees in the neighborhood.
Yeah, and just to add, a partner that we have been building a relationship and has been really helpful in this process outside of the Cleveland Tree Coalition is we were actually connected with one of our state tree stewards and arborists by the name of Alan Seward. So he was really, really helpful in assisting us really wrap our minds around the work that we're doing, because this is something that we're new that we're venturing into. So he really, really assisted us with understanding the importance of putting together a species plan that is broken out by section to address the diversity of trees that we need in our area for them to be able to sustain themselves and grow. Like many of the other panelists mentioned, funding is one of those things that I am finding myself to, I have had a little bit of difficulty wrapping my head around. Okay, yes, we have funding to be able to do these tree plantings over X amount of years, but understanding that the responsibility is going to fall on the CDC in finding channels in which we can effectively continue to do this maintenance work has been something that I've definitely run up against and continue to work through, because like I said, we're still very new in this work that we're doing. I think another thing or missing piece that could be really, really helpful, and Councilman actually touched upon this a little bit, but understanding that coming into this work, I didn't quite have an understanding, but now I do, that the city doesn't necessarily have as much capacity through the arborist department to really, really address some of the high priority maintenance needs of individual neighborhoods, and that oftentimes a lot of work, the work that they're doing is backlogged, so they have to go back and kind of address those needs for maybe like even a year prior. They're constantly kind of like trying to address issues and might not necessarily have the ability to address them as they pop up or whatever your community specifically needs at that moment. So I don't know if there's any opportunity to maybe expand that department or get some more assistance there. But I know as a smaller organization, we have a certain amount of capacity to be able to do what we do, and we're going to try our best to maintain our tree canopy, but getting a little bit more assistance from the city in that aspect would be extremely helpful, I think, for all of our neighborhoods.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and I'm going to choose a question from Jeff, who writes, can we form a core of residents who get trained and paid to help care for trees, track trees, and help talk to homeowners and residents? So do you have any ideas about how we might enlist residents and how we might also pay them, and what the need is for that?
I can go. It's something we've done in the past. You know, we've tried. There has been other orgs that have come into the community to try to form this. We've had a lot of tree steward training for residents. There, unfortunately, the dollars that to connect to employment just never was really lifted off the ground as it needed to be. And that's the other part, is like funding something like that. There are definitely people that are willing to do it. And some people have done it on a volunteer basis. So I think, it's something that has to be continuous. And I think one of the other problems is the flow of dollars when it comes to that educational component, and that community outreach comes and goes. It's not a constant thing. And I think that's one of the pieces. That's also another critical component of this work too, is the dollars have to be continuous. It can't just be, let's start and stop because there's funding available and then there's not funding available. That's a huge challenge and barrier for us. And, we are definitely, as the Community Development Corporation, we're here to do that. We're here to connect with the community, but it takes dollars, it takes time. So if we had a set of dollars to really do this, we can pull this off the ground and be able to effectively connect with the community, start a workforce development. But this work, and I say this, and Sam touched on this, it has to be very, very intentional. And that's one of the key components. The partners like the city, this has to be intentional from their lens, not just ours, because we have to meet there somewhere to be able to connect and move this work forward. If there is no connection right now, and that's another critical piece that has to continuously move forward in order for us to really lift this off the ground. And that equates to dollars. So we have to be able to lift up that funding piece up to move all of this together, employ people, educate people. It has to move as one unit.
So if I could add to that, so there's all different kinds of ways to get money. And so that is part of why we are developing a homestead program, because that takes the burden off the cities and organizations to continually have to fund projects whereby the individuals can grow product. And so, there is a such thing as nut trees, they're fruit trees, and they produce a product that someone could use for income. And so, into not just having some directly and only from other entities, but actually becoming self-sustainable or self-supporting. And so that's, the back burner conversation that we're having with homesteaders.
So thank you. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, everyone. It's been a great panel. It's been a great group of people to hear from. We are past our time here on this panel. So I want to thank you all very much for joining us today and sharing all the, sharing everything that you're hearing on the ground and everything that we need to sort of a lion's share of things that we need to focus on as we sort of grow our tree canopy here thoughtfully and intentionally. So thank you for joining us today. We will have one more at 4:30 today. We will be rolling out the community. We're rolling out the Cleveland Tree Coalition is going to roll out the community action roadmap. So please join us for that today. And again, want to thank you all for coming here today and sharing great insights. And we will stay connected. If you have any questions, Jared's dropped a contact there. Please keep those questions coming. We'll try to keep you all updated. So thank you again. With that, have a great rest of the day. Enjoy the weather. Thank you.